Hi, I'm Alex Stutchbury and welcome to ARTClass, a series of videos teaching you the key skills needed to create great art. Today I'm going to teach you a drawing style which mimics the old traditional sepia illustrations of the past. Here are the objectives.
Can I use the tea staining technique to make my image look like an old photograph? And can I apply darker layers successfully to look like a vintage illustration?
So first, what is sepia photography? Well, traditionally, when photographs were taken, they were produced using chemicals, and they put special chemicals inside to preserve the images so they didn't fade in the sunlight, so they lasted longer. The only problem is, with these chemicals, it created a kind of rusty brown look to all of the tones within that photo. So that's the first point. But also, a lot of traditional artists from 100 years ago or a little bit closer to present time also used the kind of monochromatic tonal range of sepia with their illustrations, and the way they hatched over the top with some of the traditional styles created these really cool looking but old-fashioned looking images.
Here are some sepia photograph examples, and then Arthur Rackham, a fantastic illustrator who uses a lot of hatching and dark tones for the shadow areas. E.H. Shepherd, a war artist who also did the illustrations for Winnie the Pooh, and Ronald Searle. These are the styles that we're going to try and mimic with our own work.
So let's give it a go. I thought for this traditional style, something that would suit that is, with the 75-year anniversary of VE Day coming up, why not do something linking to World War II? So I've done a bit of research. I've got an image of the D-Day landing, a terrifying event that soldiers, well, thousands of soldiers had to sadly go through. Let's see if we can give that a sepia illustration look.
The tea staining technique. Boil a kettle and pour it into a bowl containing tea bags. This is to create the sepia beige colour. Then squash them around and let them cool down. Caution, make sure it's cold before you then touch them, and remove the tea bags onto a plate ready to use.
While you let the water and the tea cool down, draw out your scene so it's ready to go.
Then apply the first layer of tea staining sepia colour all over the page.
You'll probably have to do several layers to make some bits really dark. But remember, don't use too much tea, because actually if you get it too soggy, a lot of it will run out and you won't be able to control where it goes on the page. Be selective, because you want to actually make sure that some bits will be left lighter and other bits darker, so you can already start showing some tonal shading even with the tea stage. Also, to speed it up, if you want to, between the stages, use a hairdryer, because you don't want the paper getting so waterlogged that it crinkles up too much. So maybe put a bit of tea on, dry it out. If you need to, flatten it under a book and then put another tea layer on. Maybe 2, 3, 4 goes even.
Here you can see me applying a second layer on, and actually in some areas trying to squidge a little extra tea out of the bag to make some parts darker. So build up those layers, let them dry, and then apply more, squashing the tea out to make some bits darker but not too much so it goes everywhere.
Before we start the illustration stage, you must make sure the paper is fully dry, because otherwise it damages the pens. To do the illustrations though and the hatching, choose different types of pens. Maybe one with a really fine point and one with a slightly thicker felt tip edge, because then you can shade in darker bits quickly as well as still doing the smaller details.
So first use a fine tip pen to get a few outlines in, and then use your thicker tipped pen to apply the darker tones. Remember, cross hatch, use directional shading as well in things like the curvature of the helmets, but apply those layers on. It doesn't matter if the lines are left showing. That's a style for traditional vintage illustration look that we're trying to replicate, like Arthur Rackham and Ronald Searle. Use a finer tipped pen for the details in the background to show depth, like the landing beaches here, and then apply and build up those layers again and again until you've got a completed outcome. Remember, crosshatch to make areas darker, and use directional shading to represent the curvature of an object. So one quick recap: you've got your line drawing first, then you apply layers of tea on, maybe 2 or 3 or even 4 layers if you need to, and then finally apply the detailed shadowed areas with the pen.
So there you are, a tricky process, but one which can be really successful. So going from that simple little photo I had at the beginning to the completed illustration at the end, I think it's come out pretty well. Do you remember some of those key points? When you're doing the tea staining stage, do it all over initially, yes, but then more specifically do it on the darker areas 2 or 3 or even 4 times. Then you must let it dry it fully before putting on your hatching pen illustration style on top. And don't forget some of those other basics, things like directional shading to try and represent the curvature of their helmets, or just straight lines if it's a smooth solid object like that front door. It's a tricky one to get right, but if you have a couple of goes at it, it can be really successful as an outcome. And also maybe do 2 or 3, create a little narrative with it perhaps.
Originally, when planning my Pupils at War World War I memorial animation, I created many tea-stained illustrations which I then patched together using something like iMovie or Windows Movie Maker to create the simplistic animations for the final video. Check it out on my channel if you get a chance.
Ultimately, whether you're doing just one image or several to create a little narrative scene, have some fun with it. It can be a really successful and interesting looking illustration technique if you get it right. So I look forward to seeing how you get on. My name's Alex Stutchbury. Goodbye.